So there is a wave of shutdowns, whether it's employment or services coming, and we're going to have to sit down and say, look, I'm not going to pay for the school if I can't go.
Are there discussion? I mean, all of this just seems like logic has just gone out the window in every single level. I mean, like, we've shut down all of these businesses, like you said, 100,000 businesses in New York State alone. So all of those businesses that would generate taxes, all those employees that work there that would generate taxes, the ripple effect of all of that has no governor, nobody anywhere is having any concerns about that?
So I'm only guessing, but I'm guessing that Andrew Cuomo is the governor of New York. Andrew Cuomo was one of the most important parties to engineering the housing bubble and the mortgage fraud. So this is somebody who brought you the bailouts because you needed massive mortgage fraud and other kinds of securities fraud to get that going. Okay, and he helped engineer the predatory housing loans that caused so many people to lose their home, and so he has a history of helping centralize through fraudulent means, is the way I would describe it. And when he was the Secretary of HUD, that's when the money started to go missing. So he engineered the missing money out of HUD as well.
Well, that's for California. I mean, that's for New York, but what about any of the other 49 states? And some of the governors like South Dakota that never really did a shutdown. I mean, and Ohio has been more lenient than most. I mean, isn't there some discussion somewhere saying about, hey, that's our tax base you're killing out there?
So I'm assuming there is a discussion, but that these, someone like Cuomo sees his rise in politics depending on the people who are centralizing control. So you have people who want a decentralized economy. You have other people who are making money from centralizing, and Cuomo sees himself as helping the centralizers. And the way you help the centralizers, what you're watching right now is a leverage buyout of the country. So we had a financial coup. We moved $50 trillion out. Now you bust everything down. Remember, if you printed all this money through the Fed, you'd have hyperinflation, but you create offsetting deflation by shutting down Main Street. That destroys the values on Main Street. And I'm grossly oversimplifying, but now you bring the $50 trillion back in and you buy everything up cheap. Okay, so if you want to move a lot of the manufacturing and people back from Asia and back from China, you want to move a lot of operations in and you want to pick up the land cheap. So let me look at the map we did. Let's talk about the map I showed you of Minneapolis. So we decided to get a mapping program to show, somebody in Minneapolis put up a list of all the properties that had been burned and looted. So we put up a map for subscribers and we mapped all the small business and sort of local stores that were destroyed, or their buildings were destroyed or harmed. And what you saw was you had very significant clusters in areas that are logical areas for redevelopment, including the fact that they're in opportunity zones. Now, let me explain what an opportunity zone is and try and do it without putting you to sleep. An opportunity zone was created in 2017. It was created by a group of tech entrepreneurs who wanted to sell their stock and avoid capital gains. So if you're Jeff Bezos and you started Amazon, your stock has got a value of, you have a cost basis of 0, right? So if you sell your stock, you have massive capital gains tax to pay. Okay, but if you reinvest your money instead in opportunity zones, then you can avoid capital gains. So that's buying real estate in neighborhoods and developing the smart grid. Okay, so what do we know? The central bankers approved the Going Direct plan in August at Jackson Hole. I'm sure it was approved at the Bohemian Grove the month before. And so the Fed starts into the repo market in September, implementing the Going Direct plan. The word goes out and all the billionaires and CEOs either resign or sell their stock in January, February, right? So Bezos sold $4 billion of Amazon stock. Now, if you're going to turn around and put that money into the opportunity zone, you want to go into a place where One, you can buy a lot of real estate cheap, so you can get a cluster. You won't have anybody locally interfering with you, so you can do what you want. And it'd be really helpful if the police were defunded, because then if you want to foreclose and, you know, clean out a whole place, there's nobody to give you any problem or hassle you about the law, right? Right. So you sell your stock, and I'm grossly oversimplifying here. You sell your stock in February. Normally you'd have huge capital gains, right? Because you had such a low cost basis, but you roll it into opportunity zones in cities, you know, that just happen to have violent protests.
Or you set up the violent protests in the cities where you want to invest.
So we had done this table press of all the COVID-19 deaths compared to the state and the party affiliation. There'd been something that had gone around the internet saying it was all happening in the blue states, not the red. And I said, that doesn't look right to me. And basically, once we did the table press, what you realize is once you take New York and New Jersey, everybody's the same. You know, what you had was a huge New York, New Jersey, and a few places story. But I was looking at the table and I said to the wonderful guy, James Quaid, who was doing this for us, I said, James, something's wrong. I said, there are 37 Fed locations. I want you to put a field in here and mark every city where there is a Fed branch or Fed bank and the headquarters. 37. 33 of them had violent protests. One of them was Minneapolis, and I'll bet you if we could get those 33 locations sending us the data on all the places that were burned or small businesses destroyed, because I think Minneapolis was a destroy the small business, particularly the minority small business. So, you know, it's a very ugly picture when you get into the data. If we could get that data and look at it, I bet you that a lot of those opportunity zones are in Fed cities.
Which makes it easier to access the money because it's a Fed city, or what is the?
No, not necessarily. I think those cities are going to be prime for a variety of reasons, as opportunities where you want to do this smart city development.
Oh, so, yes, the smart city, the 17 UN sustainability goals, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, to me, the riots were very professionally organized and done.
And funded.
That was a very serious operation. And they rarely do something like that when they don't stack functions. And there's no doubt to me one of the functions they're stacking is a major redevelopment plan. Because if you look at the pattern on the Minneapolis map we're showing, I couldn't believe it. I did not expect it to be that linear. Obvious. Yeah. I thought it would be more subtle. I never expected something. And I just said, James, this is a redevelopment plan. And he said, you're absolutely right. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they sent in infrastructure engineers to blow a lot of those buildings. It wasn't, just looters setting that off. You have to. Anyway, so which is to say that what we're dealing with is a war. This is an invasion.
Absolutely.
So what we're looking at is World War III, because if I want to come in and radically redevelop a city like Minneapolis, and I need to get rid of the police to do it, and I need to move huge money to the social services to do contract tracers who can come into any home and take people out, including kids.
Yep.
Now you're talking about a very lawless situation.
Yep, and they're already doing it. I mean, there was something, they were just talking about it last night. They were talking about places in California where these people, now they're getting back into testing again in California. They had let up a little bit on the masks, but now they're like pushing it again. And people there are they're really frightened. I mean, you said earlier, like you haven't been around a lot of people who are particularly nervous about this virus, but there are a lot of people in California who are really seriously terrified, and the physicians there are propagating it. I mean, my friend that lives in Orange County was telling me at the church where he goes, there's like 40 or so physicians there. The physicians will not let their family go to church. They will not let their neighbor, anybody associated with them, go into church. They go to, when they do go to church, they stand at the door and enforce mask and social distancing on everybody, including the kids. And there's this whole ripple effect about how they are terrorizing this church congregation about, we know how bad it is. We've seen how sick it is. And these people are literally scared to death that if they have any possibility of contracting this infection, they know they will die. They're terrified of it. And now that's just one small community and one small church in California.
Right.
So, but my friend who lives out there is telling me it's everywhere. You just can't even believe it. I mean, it's at Walmart, it's everywhere. People are like terrified that they're going to get this. So I don't know what they have done in California because at Santa Cruz, they just opened up the beaches again because the cops said they wanted to shut down the beaches for 4th of July. And the cops said, we're not enforcing it. There's too many here. We're outnumbered. We're not going to shut this down. But apparently a lot of people in California, particularly people that are a little bit older, they are really scared. Really scared. And there's no telling them otherwise. I mean, I've made the comment, I've said, yes, I suppose if you go to church and Jesus literally materializes and stands in front of them and literally levitates and says, it's me, they're going to go, not real. because you can't convince them, you can't convince them of anything.
So I was on a race from the time this happened because I thought the global reset, or what they're doing would happen after the election. So to me, this was an acceleration. And I was racing to try and understand the science because I said to somebody, I'm being punished for not getting an A in biology and anatomy. So, this was like a deep dive for me trying to understand health science, which is it's just not my gift. But anyway, in the process, I read a lot of stuff. I listened to a lot of people. And one of the things I found really gratifying about the last 3 months is how many amazing, incredible doctors and how many amazing, incredible scientists went to the trouble of getting and making one or more videos and educating us. And it wasn't just a few, it was a lot. And they were really intelligent, they were really capable, they really made sense, and it wasn't just a few of them. I happen to believe when you get 20 really brilliant, smart people all saying things that make sense, there's something there. And documenting it with studies and blah, 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 blah. And I'm lucky because I have a couple of subscribers who are nurses and doctors, and they really help me understand. Because I couldn't, two things would come in and I couldn't tell which one was really valid and which one was disinformation, but they could. So it was very, very helpful. And, and I absolutely believe that facts matter. And that's why I've always had this much trouble with people who are, deeply into the TV set because they, it's like they're lost to reality and you can't reach them.
Yeah, it's true. And I've said this before and I've said it a lot. It's like a bell curve, and the 0 to 25%, you just have to bless them and turn them over to God, and because there's nothing that's going to change their mind. I mean, nothing that will change their mind. They believe in authority figures. It's gone into their brain, almost like the new German medicine, the stuff that goes and sucks into your brain, and it's an emotional hit and it's not coming out. Then the 25% to the 50%, if we had the luxury of time, that we could nurture those people around and educate them over time, but we don't have. And then there's the 50 to 75%, which are our target audience. Those are the people who are willing to question, willing to be open to debate, willing to weigh both sides. And we can move them forward into the 75 to 100%, which is preaching to the choir, the people that are on our philosophy and understand what we're saying. And we keep talking to them. We have to, because we have to keep the wind underneath their wings, because they have to deal with the whole rest of these people, and they get really discouraged. They're like, I'm the only person in my community who thinks that vaccines are bad. I'm the only person who thinks that masks are silly and they should not be worn. Not only silly, but they're dangerous. I'm the only person who wants to walk in and shake somebody's hand, and everybody else looks at me like I'm a crazy person. We have to keep supporting our base and the people who have made the leap to come over and done the investigation. But that 50 to 75%, those are the people that I feel like are the starfish on the beach that we can still like pluck them out and save them, or save them at a time,
Because of financial fraud, I had to deal. So I went through a process, and the process started where I was accused of a whole bunch of things that I'd never done. And I decided, okay, I'm going to prove in the courts, I'm going to prove with document, I'm going to prove that it's all a lie. And I spent 11 years and $6 million. I was able to win. I was able to prove it was all a lie. And the next thing you know, I had people very close to me in my family saying, oh, I was really guilty. And the reason was because they could make money or go up the ladder by doing that. In other words, the central bankers needed me to be wrong. And they would pay any amount of money forever to continually prove that I was wrong. And that's when I discovered, you have to look to yourself and God on these things. You can't wait for the crowd to affirm you. You just have to do the right thing. And you're doing it for I would say you're doing it to stay in right relationship. You just have to stay in right relationship and not worry about anybody else. But the other thing is, I think you have to realize when you're talking with people who are adamant we should wear a mask, you're dealing with a couple of different fact patterns. And one of those and there are several different ones, but one of those fact patterns are people who've been told by their doctor it's a good idea, or have read what they think is a peer-reviewed scientific study that says it's a good idea. And they really believe it's a good idea. But then you have a lot of other people who literally are wearing a mask because they want to be part of a certain protected class, because they believe if they just wear their mask and are good, they won't be harmed.
I sent you that article, the cult of the mask.
Right.
That was written, it came from a Catholic source, actually. The cult, which a lot of people discredit it because it was written there. But it really wasn't religion. It didn't really have anything to do with religion, but it was a really well-written article about the cult of the mask.
Right.
And I sort of get that language, that you're part of a club now. You feel like you're over here and you're the ones doing social good, and that whole social credit thing that has sort of creeped into America without actually having it as of yet registered anywhere like it is in China.
Right.
But that whole social credit system, and my social credit is I'm taking care of others and I'm not selfish and I don't want people to die, therefore because I'm wearing a mask, not understanding that the mask isn't doing any of those things that you think it is.
Well, but here's the thing. When you're I watched a video the other day of a policeman trying to have an intelligent conversation with a protester who was being completely and utterly irrational. But he kept trying to have a conversation with her, and he didn't understand that there was no point in having a conversation with her because she was not rational and she was never going to be rational. And there was no way you could reach her on a rational, on an intellectual level. I mean, you were dealing with somebody who'd been programmed. You weren't talking to a person, you were talking to a program. And I think when, on the mask issue, you have to be prepared to manage interactions with other humans about masks, but interactions with programs. I mean, you're not necessarily talking to a person, you're talking to an AI. I hate to say it.
It's frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, it is frightening.
It's frightening to think that that we're much further down that road or down that path than what we would like to believe. So
2 years ago, I tried to get every subscriber I had to watch two dreadful movies. One is The Cell with John Cusack, and the other is The Kingsman, which are both about using cellular technology to mind control people and get them to behave violently or kill them. And after I got them to watch The Kingsman, we started to see brawls break out, 20, 30, 40 individuals starting to fight at Chuck E. Cheese and in shopping malls. And one of the things I told them is, look, they're prototyping this technology. And if you're in a Chuck E. Cheese, I don't know why you would be, but if you are, and this starts to happen, turn off your phone and get out. Because there's nothing you can do. You know, you're up against a program. Now, I also had someone wonderful call me whose children, I don't know if you've seen the videos of teachers online teaching children how to scream at their parents.
I've seen some of the fallout of that. I've seen some of these kids that were screaming at their parents and recording it. I didn't see the teaching part.
So I watched the teaching, but I had somebody whose kids had done it to him. And he emailed me and he said, you know, I feel if my kids had died in a car wreck, I couldn't feel more horrible. And it took me, you know, I wrote him a long thing and I said, I want you to read this book and listen to this SOLARI report. And, you know, there's a lot of information to help you understand, but you need to understand your kids are a victim and you're the parent and it's your job to help protect them. But they've now been hijacked literally by a program. So I think one of the things we're all going to figure out is, you know, on any of these issues, whether it's social distancing, masks, and it's complicated because it's going to get caught up with all the legal issues, we're going to be interacting with people who literally are not in their right mind.
What was the name of that first movie? You said The Kingsman, and what was the first one?
The Kingsman.
No,
The Cell with John Cusack.
The Cell?
The Cell.
The Cell. Yeah, and that all kind of gets muddled in with the 5G technology and what sort of smart dust do we already have in our system, and if we get vaccinated, are we going to have more nanotechnology that's injected into us through this COVID-19? And what about that little mark that they want to put on your hand that's where to get to the paperless society, which they've tried to do the moneyless society for a long time. You know, when I was at the UPS store the other day, there was a, you know, where you paid the bill. There was a plastic shield in front of the cash register, and on the cash register it said, please pay with credit card, do not pay with cash, it spreads viruses. Yeah.
Great reset.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and so, and all of these different things, you know, are just preparing us more, each one of these things where you go to every checkout, everything. I went into the bank and I'm sitting at a desk with the guy because I was doing a wire transfer and I had to sign the papers. So he's got this big plastic thing with this little thing underneath that he had to pass the paper underneath for me to sign. Now, it doesn't matter that it only goes up about this high, you know, and so again, that goes with that cartoon, you know, the viruses only go here and go down. They don't go up and over. They don't go around. They don't go through that little pass through.
You're so smart.
You know?
This is the smartest virus that ever lived.
I know. It doesn't go through that little pass through. And the masks that they have, the bankers have these people wearing. I mean, there's only 5 people in this entire branch, but yet they'll meet you at the door and you cannot go in there without a mask on. And the ones that they have him on, and my banker guy that I deal with is kind of heavy set, and they got these black masks that are just like tight up around his face like this. He said, I can't stand it. He said, I can't breathe, and I'm short of breath, and he's hot. You could tell he was sweating. I said, well, you don't have to wear that for me. You know, if you feel like you want to take it off, that's fine. He said, I'll take it off as soon as you leave. He said, because it's horrible in here. It's just horrible. And so, but all of these things, you know, you go to the grocery store now, you got this plastic thing that's separating you and the cashier. And, you know, you've got to like work around to get your groceries and to be able to pay your bill. I mean, all of it is social conditioning. All of it is just social conditioning that we've just accepted. I mean, have you seen the picture? Have you seen the pictures of the blackjack tables in Las Vegas?
No.
I mean, they've got plastic divisions in between each person sitting around the blackjack table, and then there's between where the dealer is. There's like you can deal the cards, but then there's a plastic thing, and then you got each one of these. Again, it's this really smart virus. It doesn't go around or over the top. But man, we protected people side by side at these blackjack tables. You know.
Yeah, and it doesn't go to the cards. It never, ever touches the cards.
Never.
So if you, I think they have 2 goals here. I'll be blunt. One is I think they have to manage a huge wave of illness coming from the injections and coming from 5G. And the question is, as a medical, municipal, and governmental structure, you know, how many, let's just pick a number out of our head. If you get 10, 20, 30, you know, Judy Mikovits has used the number 50 million. Arthur Furstenberg has said, you know, there won't be life on Earth after they really get the Starlink system and all the 5G going. But let's say we get the same, we got the Spanish influenza was 50 million worldwide, right?
So they say.
So we have a bigger population
I don't know how they ever come up with those numbers, Catherine. I mean, they didn't have computer models like we have now that like fabricate numbers out of air. And I'm sure they didn't go around and do a head count in all these little tertiary countries and all these states that didn't even exist in the US yet. I mean, so is this just one of those wet thumb to the wind numbers, 50 million people died? I mean, how do they know that?
I don't know.
You know, so, but anyways.
I do know a lot of people died.
Well,
I mean, just the old timer stories in my county, I've heard, I think I told you some of them. But anyway,
let's assume that
a wave of injectables that are trying to put into your body what these might be doing, and have been rushed to market. So we have experimental injections, they're rushed to market, God knows what they have in them. And then 5G is a new wave of radiation. And so it's fair to say you could probably see an awful lot of death from just the immune systems being destroyed.
Death, or even worse, not death.
Right.
Like you've even said, like, I've heard several, like when you did your interview with James Corbett the other day, which was so excellent, when it was titled, there's some things that are worse than death. And I've always said that, even as a physician. I mean, there are some things that people experience, burns and crush injuries and, all kinds of different things that we're left with that, for some people that is worse than death.
Right.
And so,
and we're talking about potential neurological damage, which is
yes,
right.
All kinds of things. Now, here's the other side of that. When you just said they want to manage this large wave of illness, they've cut back on physicians, they've cut their salaries, they've laid off people. I read yesterday that 42 hospital systems across the country have now declared bankruptcy and are shutting down. So as they're going to roll this out and make people sick, are they going to not have access to medical care? And are you not going to have access to your health insurance unless, of course, you're vaccinated? They've already started that in some places with some adults, where they've said, if you don't have a flu shot, you can't come in here. Like they've kicked out kids out of pediatric practices for a long time.
So this is very interesting because one of the things the insurance industry has been dealing with is lower interest rates. It's really made it tough. And with the aging population now, I saw one number that indicated in 2018, the long care health industry had paid out a 35% increase in in payments. And so you have the insurance industry under real stress. Now, I have to assume that everybody staying home and not going to the hospital and not doing elective surgery has saved the health insurance industry a fortune this year.
Yes, and well, yes and no. I'm sure it's saved the insurance industry a fortune, except that they're all bundled in with the hospital systems, and the hospital systems are going broke. But
that's not the insurance company's problem.
Well, true. It's interesting to me when they started coming out with those numbers about how like 80% of the hospital is empty. You can't go there. And people who should be going to the doctor are not. People with hypertension and diabetes and, things that are people with strokes that should have been getting therapies and, a lot of things that they should be doing. But it also told me that, if we are looking at our healthcare system overall as approaching 35% of our GDP, and if you look at 80% of that 35% is elective procedures where they just tinker at human beings to make money off of them, what does that really say about what healthcare is and that oxymoron of calling it healthcare instead of disease care, So
here's the thing. If you look at everything that's gone on for the last 3 months, wouldn't that, if you were worried about a wave of sickness from the injections and from 5G, wouldn't you want to protect the insurance industry from a wave of expense from people getting sick?
You would think.
But couldn't some of this be related to that? They know they're going to get this wave.
So they're just keeping all their coffers in their pocketbook? Since the insurance industry hasn't been paying out anything, they're just like flush with cash now?
So one, they're flush with cash, but two, you've streamlined the system so that it's going to be much harder for people to get in the door. And you've got a cover story. It was the virus. So it's not these different things causing it. It's not the absence of healthcare. I mean, if I was going to do all these injections and I was the insurance company, I'd be wild because, you know, all those premiums were not set up to deal with, you know, a global experiment of, you know, sticking brain machine interface and messing with people's neurological systems to this extent. Mm-hmm. So if I was the insurance companies, I'd be wild.
It's a big gamble.
Right. And if you look at the history of, you know, if you look at virus mania, a lot of that has been designed to protect the insurance industry. So they're a major player here. Okay, so we have this wave of disease coming, and this potentially is the story. Now, I think if you are going to manage the population through this enormous sort of pincer movement of the injections and the 5G, wouldn't you want, you know, how do you get an animal to go into the slaughterhouse? Well, the way you get an animal to go into the slaughterhouse is when you get a Judas goat who leads, you know, they follow the Judas goat and the Judas goat leads them to the slaughterhouse. But another is to set up a series of conditions that say things are horrible now and you feel a lot of cognitive dissonance and incoherence, but if you just get the vaccine, you'll be fine. And so you set up the immaculate conception. You know, you get the vaccine and suddenly you're free to travel, you're free to have a social life, you don't have to walk around with a mask. So you set up all these conditions and everything will be all right and all these horrible things will go away if you just get the vaccine. And that's how you get the animals headed into the slaughterhouse.
And people are already set up to do that. They're already talking about it. You know, like how many people have you heard say, or even on various broadcasts say, oh, you know, as soon as the vaccine's here, everything will be okay.
Right.
I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday at my office. They said it's just a school teacher who's refusing to wear the mask at school. She said, because, you know, 60-70% of communication with anybody, but particularly with children, is nonverbal. And I'm not going to wear a mask because I teach special ed kids. I mean, how are they going to know?
Right.
And she's having a tiff kind of with her local principal. And she said, so when do you think this is going to change? She said, well, as soon as the vaccine's ready, it'll change, because as soon as you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. It's a school teacher. This was told this yesterday. And as soon as the vaccine's available, then you can get the vaccine, then you don't have to wear a mask. And so that's already being set up. And then the corollary to that is the people who say, no, thank you, I don't want the vaccine. Because I get asked all the time, do you think they're going to make it mandatory? I said, I don't think they will, because I don't think legally they can. Because vaccination is really like a state's issue. Now, of course, they can do anything they want. But I think for the most part, they won't make it mandatory because that looks so bad for them. What they're going to do is they're going to remove so many of your social privileges that it's going to make it really hard to not say yes.
So Ohio State University, you know, unless you do the vaccinations and wear a mask and do all these things, you can't come to work there. So they're going to have the employers do it. And where I think they're going is,
so
literally with 5G.
Back to that policy issue, right?
They're going to set up these 5G zones where literally, you know, they're going to set it up so that if you don't take the vaccination, you can't leave your house.
Wow. How do we get around that, Catherine? What's our, because that's what people listening to this is going to say. I know that's my audience. It's going to say, what can we do? I don't want that vaccine, but yet I got to keep a roof over my head and provide for my family.
Right.
What do I do?
First of all, in war, there's no magic bullet. So I can't tell you there's a way to deal with this. you know, when I left the Bush administration and started to do what I did, there was a way to deal with it then. But now that we've shifted 50 trillion out and they have much more power, you know, it's a whole different ballgame. And so what I will tell you is this is about freedom of slavery. This is war. And, you know, I have no other option but to fight. And I will fight, you know, I will do everything I can. Now, what I know is the way to win, because first and foremost, it's the spiritual war. So you have to address it spiritually. But then the other thing you have to do is you have to address it financially. Because if you look at who we're buying from, if you look at who we're investing with, if you look at who we're paying taxes to, we're financing this. And this is not about the vaccination. This is about the governance structure. So are we willing to be run by an invisible governance structure on a secret basis and proceed to support and finance it? And if we are, we're going to be managed in a slavery system. So, you know, the middle of the road, it's what I said when we last talked, the middle of the road is going away. And so what you have to decide is, you know, are you willing to fight? And then you've got to figure out how you're going to fight. Now, the way I understand how I'm going to fight is, you know, I decide all these things through prayer, because I don't think I'm going to win. I don't think any of us can win. I think we need divine intelligence and divine intervention to win here.
Oh, absolutely.
So, right.
It's all about Ephesians 6, right?
Right.
Put in the full armor of God. And I'll put in a little plug here for people with the little thing that I started, my happy hour with Dr. T. And Happy Hour with Dr. T rolls out in 3 formats. The Happy Hour with Dr. T I do every day at 6 o'clock Eastern as an Instagram Live. We strip it off of Instagram and we put it up as an MP4 on disseminate.tv /happy hour. And then I take the same thing that I've written out that I use as my little script for it, and I put it over into happyhourwithdrt.blogspot.com. So if you've missed it, and the Blogspot's turned out really nice. In fact, over the weekend, Blogspot updated their software and made it a lot more user-friendly and a lot more features. It was really kind of cool. So the Happy Hour with Dr. T, DRT, Happy Hour with Dr. T blogspot.com is kind of cool. And it's got, I'm really proud of it. It's coming together really nice. It's the, you know, it's a verse, it's a little commentary on the verse, and it's a prayer. And when I do the Instagram Live, a lot of people have said to me, oh, that prayer was just so amazing. Because I just say to God, what do people need to hear from me today? What is a message? Is it an inspirational message? Is it a kick you in the butt message? I mean, is it, you know, I did one yesterday on Job. We talked, you know, and I had people telling me.
Job is one of it. You know, my favorite line in Job? The last line. Do you know what the last line of Job says?
That he lived a long and happy, he lived 140 years and had a long and prosperous life.
Right. And Job died old and full of days.
And life fulfilled, yeah.
One of my favorite lines of Job, one of the preachers says the moral of the story of Job is don't put a period where God put a comma.
Ooh, I like that.
Isn't that good?
You know, one of my favorite lines in Job is the very first verse. You know, I came into this world with nothing, I'll leave with nothing. In the meantime, praise God. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it says, right? And so it's a variety of things from Psalms, Hebrews, 1 Corinthians, Chronicles. And it's just like things that I use 3 different apps. I have 3 different verse of the day apps, and sometimes I just go out to my concordance and I'll just put in things like I put in a thing yesterday about, you know, time delays. And it says, what does the Bible say about time delays? And I'll pull up a bunch of verses and I'll just read through them, and something will just resonate with my spirit. And that'll be the one that I kind of go with. So I'm just kind of getting started with it. I started it June the 3rd. So it's relatively new, but if you want to see what it's like, it's a happy hour with Dr. T.blogspot.com.
Blogspot?
.blogspot, blogspot.com. That's the blog. And then the Happy Hour with Dr. T Instagram is every day at 6 o'clock.
So my vision of what's going to happen here is that the effort underway ultimately is going to fail. And it's going to come to the rest of us to kind of turtle through the wave.
Which I love that article. I love that turtle article you sent me. It was great.
So, so this is going to be like a tsunami, and we're vastly overpowered. So we stay in alignment with divine intelligence. We turtle through, and we need a vision of what's kind of world we're going to build after this fails. Because I'm not depending on us to stop, sort of this wave. I'm pretty convinced they'll kill each other. But it depends on us to create a vision and the outline and the hope and sort of the building blocks for a civilization that could work. Because we've had an economic model on this planet for 500 years that basically says, one group of people go rape the other group of people to subsidize our way of life. And now with globalization, we need to come into one where we have a more integrated model, and we've got to operate on fundamental productivity. So I call it the central banking warfare model. The central banking warfare model is not going to work, and hopefully it won't destroy the planet on its way to failure. But after it fails, we've got to have a model or a series of models that will work. How are we going to evolve and cooperate? And how are we going to build an economy which is on a living model instead of a machine model?
I have a question for you from an economic perspective. So this is where you've lived your whole life, your career life. Where do these people live in their brain that, $10 billion isn't enough? They need $50 billion or they need $100 billion. I mean, is it just purely greed? Is it he who has more zeros has more power? Where do they operate from? Why isn't enough enough?
So at the highest level, they're concerned with strategic direction and risk management, and they want central control. And essentially, if you can introduce robots and integrate robots with the human population and run everything with AI on central control, you can build a very, very powerful civilization, including one that can achieve a multi-planetary civilization. So you're trying to soak this civilization for as much capital as possible to build a much greater civilization. And they are doing it because the technology allows them to do it, and because they're dealing with risk issues that we don't necessarily understand. And that's always been one of my questions. What are the real risk issues? Why the rush to become a multi-planetary civilization?
Any insights into that? Into why that might possibly be?
Well, if I was, my nickname for the committee that runs the world is Mr. Global. If I was Mr. Global, my number one strategic goal would be to become a multi-planetary civilization, because you never bet the ranch on one.
And at the same time, you destroy the ranch that you're living in, right?
Well, what Mr. Global would say is that it is impossible to manage the current planet on a risk managed basis. And I think they believe if you get everybody basically into a slavery system where you can mind control them and control them with technology, you can manage the risk. Because if you look at the new technology, if it's allowed to go free and groups weaponize it, it's very dangerous. So for example, we're watching globally as the US trade system sort of falls apart. You're watching all the local bullies sort of rise up and say, okay, anything goes. Big bully gone, now it's my turn. And of course, if you look at the kind of weaponry and technology they can get their hands on, it's very, very dangerous. And it's increasingly going to be proven to be ungovernable, which is why they want one tight central control. I mean, another reason is if you look at the American people, so I'm going to argue this from Mr. Global's point of view. If you look at the American people have been massively subsidized by the global game. So we've lived a per capita lifestyle, which is way above what we've produced. And a lot of that subsidy came in by basically printing fiat currency and then running around the world with the military and, killing people who didn't do what we said. And we were happy to go along with it, which is why, if you know, from Mr. Global's point of view, we have no rights because we've been willing to support Mr. Global, you know, in killing millions of people so that we could live a nice life. If you've never watched my Red Button, I have a story called the Red Button Story where I basically go into this. And so, you know, we were fine with transnational organized crime as long as we were getting a piece of the action. So this is our day of reckoning where the world is now going to say, and Mr. Global's now going to say, we're taking your subsidy away. And what they know is when you take people's subsidy away, they get quite cranky. And so if you have them basically mind controlled, I mean, there's a reason they want that level of control. I don't agree with it. And I think there's a much better pathway. But, you know, I put that pathway on the table in the 90s and they rejected it. They wanted, you know, you had three choices. You could change the model, you could go to complete central control, or you could depopulate, or some combination of the three. But I think they believed that they could never trust the general population to be on board with a strategically intelligent plan and support it bottom up.
Interesting.
Now you know, my experience is they're afraid. They're afraid of the general population.
Well, they're significantly outnumbered. Even
Right.
though they're, you know, and I've said this for a really long time, even here in the US, it's like, you know, there's 545 people in Congress. There's 320 million people of us. I mean, you know, we took you know, a third of the population. If we took you know, 50 million people and just took them down to Washington D.C., you know, I mean, my husband, God rest his soul, used to always say that things won't change until we have our level of the French Revolution, and they chop off politicians' heads and walk down the street with them on a pole. You know, and that's, you know, like they did during the French Revolution. And, you know, they've just dumbed us down and distracted us more and more with social media and video games and Xbox and all these distractions of stuff that we did. They've convinced parents that kids can't just do one sport, they've got to do three, and they've got to play two instruments, and they're running around like crazy ragged. And so we've just been so scattered and so shattered as a society that it's been pretty, you know, it's taken a while, but they're very patient people. They've been doing this a long time. You know, they know what the end goal is, and if they get there an inch at a time or a foot at a time or a yard at a time, it doesn't really matter.
Right, but I'm gonna be a bad guy because I left Washington in 1998, and I spent every year since then trying to educate and teach people about what was going on. Mm-hmm. And the corruption is not just at the top; the corruption is from sea to shining sea. If you take every county in America and you list out the amount of money we're spending on gambling, on, you know, narcotics, on liquor, on fast food, on you name it, what we're spending, that's enough money to completely redevelop America on a private basis. We don't need anybody.
Wow. Okay.
So I'll never forget, I was on Coast to Coast, and somebody had just sent me a list of the independent grocers' gross sales for I think it was the 6 or 12 months before then. $2 billion on fresh fruits and vegetables, $10 billion on carbonated drinks.
Wow.
And I said, George, no society that has those dietary practices has any kind of future. We're toast. You know, and that's before you add in the autism. So if you just look at the things that we control, Sherri, you know, so I'm going to tell you the Red Button story.
Okay.
Do you have enough time for the Red Button story? I'm keeping you for a long.
I do.
Okay. So this is my most famous story. I'd been invited by a healthcare practitioner. She was a naturopath, and I was working with her on detoxing. And she asked me to come speak at a conference called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation, which is spiritually evolved people who are interested in making our society more spiritually advanced. And she asked me to give a speech called How the Money Works in Organized Crime that later became a very funny article, famous, called Narco Dollars for Beginners. And it was meant to be a light, funny description of how transnational organized crime and Washington and Wall Street intersect. So here I am in front of this audience of 100 spiritually evolved people, and I'm in the middle of the speech, and I'm describing Gary Webb's work, showing the U.S. intelligence agencies and the Bushes and the Clintons bringing drugs into Mena, Arkansas, and sort of the South Central crack cocaine epidemic. And I described the fact that Congress had testimony about this they'd had hearings on the Dark Alliance allegations in 1998, and was very much part of the impeachment politics. And during that time, I was helping a very amazing investigative reporter in Washington do a story about all of this. And the Department of Justice spokesperson that she was given by the Department of Justice to liaison with said that at the time, the U.S. economy laundered $500 billion to $1 trillion of all illegal money. So that's not just narcotics, it's financial fraud. With financial fraud, it's gotten much bigger. Anyway, so I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped being the global leader of illegal money? Because the U.S. is the #1 money launderer for illegal funds. So we had a little conversation, and the audience said, well, we'd have trouble because the stock market would go down because that money would go to Hong Kong or Zurich. It wouldn't go through the U.S. system. And another person said, well, we'd have trouble financing the government deficit because that money would, not come here. And so, and our government checks might go up. Our taxes might go up, or our government checks might stop. And I said, okay, let's pretend there's a big red button up here in the lectern, and if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your county, your city, your town tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion of all illegal monies and the accumulated capital thereon. I said, who here will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many people would push the button?
None?
One.
Wow.
So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our government checks to stop. We don't want our taxes to go up, and we don't want our IRAs and 401ks to go down in value.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So this problem is not just at an elite level. The thing that kept the false prosperity going was the China trade. And the reason this is happening now is China has announced the China trade is over. They've made it very clear they're not going to finance our Walmart purchases. They're going to finance the Silk Road and compete with us. They're going to finance a satellite constellation that competes with us. And so they're not financing us anymore. And so what the Trump administration has been dealing with is, how do you bring that trade deficit down? How do you bring the manufacturing back? And how do you rebalance against the China trade? And then how do you tell the American people who have a per capita income of $65,000 a year that they're now about to have a per capita income of $20,000 a year?
Wow.
Right.
So you've known even bigger, broader than me, but I said from the very beginning that this had nothing to do with the virus. It was economic warfare. Is that true? And I guess I'll just say it straight out. Trump poked the bear with China. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? With all
so the rebalancing had to happen one way or another. And it had nothing to do with Trump. It had to happen. And because Trump was pumping the economy, the trade deficit kept getting worse and worse and worse. So there's some people who say China is refusing to take dollars, and that's part of what's driving this. From everything I can see, if I was just going to look at this and say, what is a logical explanation? I would say this is 100% extending the dollar system and keeping it going while you accelerate the implementation of the new system. Because the new system is to go to a financial system where at a retail level, you get rid of currency and simply control people with credits at the company store.
And what about the gold-backed dollar and the idea of looking at all your assets in the ground and coming up with some sort of a collateral of that sort?
That's what they're doing.
Okay.
That's what they're doing. And but it's not oil and it's not gold. It's humans.
Oh. Interesting.
So the reason we canceled the African slave trade, I believe there were two reasons. One was Europe was never able to put down the Haiti rebellion, and they were afraid it would spread. But the other was the banks kept losing money because you couldn't perfect the collateral. So the banks in London kept, the plantations would sell the slaves west, and they could never prove that that was their collateral. But now you can. What we're talking about, what the injection fraud is about converting people to collateral and turning people into a natural resource.
But haven't they done that for a long time with our birth certificates and our social security numbers and things like that? And
Yes,
haven't they collateralized that?
Right, but they needed to think of that as a form of free range slavery. Now we're not talking about free range. Now we're talking about slavery. They're talking about basically being able to directly control somebody 24/7 on an economic basis with AI and software. If you look at how much Stasi had to spend on controlling people, that was a very personnel and expensive system. Now you're talking about something which is basically, can control an individual 24/7 using AI and software at a very detailed, essentially molecular level for pennies on the dollar.
Wow.
Right. So here's the thing. The pathway to fight this requires that we come clean, because we are complicit. Let me be a bad guy again. You can't drug this many people with pharmaceuticals unless millions of us are helping them do it. We're the employees at the pharmaceutical companies. We're the employees at the FDA. We're the employees at the CDC. We're the doctors and nurses pushing the stuff. We're the doctors and nurses saying nothing. Okay? How many times have you seen doctors make lots more money than you because they didn't have your integrity? Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I have watched for my entire life, while the crowd continually supports, the guy who CNN puts on, or the guy who makes a lot of money, and he makes a lot of money because he's helping to bring drugs into your neighborhood. So we have a choice, but we have to come clean about our complicity, because if you look at all the people doing all these things, if you add up all the organized crime, all the corruption, all the kickbacks, all the swamp activities, and on and on and on, there's a huge number of Americans who are participating in this.
So it comes down to what you said earlier, the end game is slavery. The end game is total control and slavery of your mind, your money, your spirit, everything.
Right. You're not going to have any assets if you let all of this happen.
Right.
So here's the thing to do, and this is what they did in South America when things collapsed. In Porto Alegre, they did something called participatory budget. The citizens said to the municipality, it's time for us to do the budget. And they all got together, they got out the financial statements, they got out the budget, and they said, we're going to run everything on a totally open, transparent basis. And we're going to take a look at the money, and we're going to come clean on all of this stuff, who's doing what and how we want to run it. And they re-engineered everything to something that could be a much more productive, much higher integrity society.
And who did that?
In Porto Alegre.
I don't know where that is.
Latin America.
Oh.
Yeah. It's called participatory budgeting. Do a search or go to Wikipedia and look up participatory budgeting. But to get out of this, we have to re-engineer how all the money works. And that includes our own money, because if we're making money, giving people vaccines, or we're making money, giving people drugs they don't need, or elective surgery they don't need, or if we're giving money doing financial fraud, or if we're making money on all this crazy stuff, we have to sit down and look at the money and say, okay, how do we get to doing something that really helps people, that's really useful, that's really productive. Because all this massive subsidy we've been getting, whether it was from the China trade or the fiat currency game, all of that is going away. I look like I've really put you out there. You
No,
can see your face.
what you're seeing is my brain just like spinning. Like, how do we do this? Because the end game of, total slavery, because is really a real pivotal point. Because
So here's how you do it. Because you just have to. Go ahead.
Well, I heard you say, in one of your other interviews, it's like, I have to decide, am I okay with living in total slavery, or am I okay with death? Because total slavery really is death. Physical death is just freedom. I mean, physical death is moving on and, getting to go home early, right? And I think that people, and I've said this a few times about this whole mark of the beast chipping stuff, before they're standing at the door with their power blasting chipper, you better make a decision on what you're going to do with that.
Right.
And you're taking it, that whole conversation to a much broader, bigger scale.
Because if you're going to say no to the vaccine, you got to say no to paying them.
Yeah.
Because when that guy shows up to give you, and I'm not going to call him, when that guy shows up to inject poison into you, you're going to be paying a salary. And the question is, why are you doing that? Why are you paying someone to kill your children?
And take them away.
Right. Why are you doing that? So you've got to pull the plug. And I think this comes down, everybody listening to this, it comes down to your food, your energy, your shelter. Okay? For the next 5 years, if these guys pull the plug, and you have to live on 20% of what you lived on 2 years ago. I mean, I went in 1 week, I went from having $1 million a month cash flow for me and my business to zero.
Wow.
Yeah, I finally had $2,000 a month. So, but it was quite a learning experience. So, but number one,
she says very calmly,
I don't care how much money you have, where are you going to get food you can trust? And that's not just a matter of money. Where can you find farmers and ranchers and sources of food, or your own garden and your own orchard that you can trust? Because I will tell you now, going into most stores, if I go into Whole Foods and look at the hamburger, I'm not buying that. I have no idea what's in there. I don't trust it. So because the debasement in the trustworthiness of the corporate systems are going like this, in my opinion. So the first thing is food. Then the second thing is energy. Are you going to be dependent on the smart grid, or can you get together with your neighbors and can you find a way out of it? Where are you going to send your kids to school? You're going to have to homeschool, because between all the masks and the social distancing and the curriculum's not even, it's just disinformation. So how are you going to school your kids without sending them into a machine that's going to basically kill them? And then shelter. A lot of people are going to have to learn how to build houses. So, and it goes on and on and on. But we're going to have to completely radically reinvent what we do and how we do it to build trustworthy systems. It was really funny. When they passed the 2008 Housing Act, I called my attorney who worked through all the mortgage fraud with me. And she had a young son. And I said, I just finished reading the new housing bill. If you look at the fraud, the systemic fraud in the mortgage system and the housing system, it is much easier for your son to learn how to build his own house than to deal with something that's fraudulent.
Wow, that's profound.
Right.
That's really
well. It's
profound.
Interesting. There are people now who are putting together all sorts of open source hardware toolkits to teach everybody how to build a tractor, how to build a house, how to build we can learn how to do all this. And if you look at the technologies around, it's amazing to do it. You and I are not going to want to learn how to build a house, but somebody who's 20, it's a great idea. So I'm just saying we're going to have to reinvent things. And I think it is so important, if we want to call on divine intervention, to reinvent our lives on a basis of integrity and right relationship. So,
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
We have an article called Coming Clean, and I'll post it in the notes. It's sort of a, okay, how do we do it? Anyway, so you can see there are many other things we want to talk about other than masks.
Oh, I feel like getting associated with you is like it's like coming home. It's like reconnecting with, my long lost girlfriend that I haven't seen like in 3 lifetimes or something,
Well, here's the thing. If we're going, if you look at the people running things, the old system is dying and they're trying to bring in a new system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think their new system will fail. What the rest of us don't want to do is we don't want to die as a result of their failure. It's going to make a mess. And so the question is, how do we duck what they're doing? How do we kind of turtle through? And then if their plan doesn't work, how do we put a plan on the table that can work? How can we really create a human civilization? To do that, we're going to have to come clean.
Did you see the movie The Postman with Kevin Costner?
I love that movie.
I love that movie too.
Yeah.
It's this, and there's so many different elements in it. It's sort of like that movie. I love it. I love the movie V for Vendetta.
Yeah.
V for Vendetta is one of I've seen that movie at least 11 times, because every time I've seen it, every single time, because you don't need to watch the storyline after the first or second
Right.
time, every single time there are messages upon messages upon messages in that movie.
Right.
And I've told a lot of the people that in a lot of the interviews that I've done, pull out that movie, V for Vendetta, and promise yourself, even if you've seen it before, you're going to watch it twice, because you'll see so many messages of what's going on in there now.
So we do on the SOLARI Report every week, we do a Let's Go to the Movies where I review and recommend a movie. Because one of the things I learned, people are busy. They don't have time to understand what's going on in the world. But if you can give them a series of, movies and say, this is true, this is true, this is true. I learned early on that in America, fact is fiction and fiction is fact. And, so I tell people, if you want to understand the economy, it's no problem. Sit down on Saturday morning, get a, whatever your favorite drink is, iced tea, whatever, wine, beer, and watch Godfather 1, Godfather 2, Godfather 3. And that's the American economy as of 1979. You've got it. It's all in the movies.
It's all in the movies. Well, there's people that claim, and I think I believe this at a big level, is that, on a spiritual level, they have to tell you what they're going to do. That's how they get away with it.
It's true.
They use Hollywood, the burning bush, right? They use Hollywood to be able to put that information out to us in terms of fiction. But really what it is, they're telling you their playbook. They're telling you in advance.
Right. And it's also the story of Job. Because they're telling you how the software works. And then the question is, do you have the courage to not put a period where God put a comma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really about which side you're on. Okay, well, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. It's been great.
I know. Every conversation we have is just magical.
So I went a lot longer than I was planning. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to put the links for everything you found and I found that we think is really good on what are the facts and the science around wearing masks. But I'll also put up that link from the sort of Davos spinoff of what they say the science is why you should. So if they
and over the course of, it might take me, because we're coming up on 4th of July weekend and I've got some commitments, but I'm going to go through all of those links and all of those articles, those 47 articles that I found. And it'll take me a little while, but I'll put together a summary, like a clickable PDF file, and I'll send it to you for your subscribers.
I'll just keep adding it there, because what we're going to do for the second quarter wrap up, it's going to be called the Injection Fraud COVID-19 Best Resources. And what we want to come up with are what are the best resources on all the different topics.
Awesome.
And, several people have done that, but I think the more people can have access, there's so much misinformation and disinformation. If they can have the best sources, that will be helpful. Okay, so any last message on masks?
Don't do it.
Well, I have to say, looking at your face says everything we need to know about masks, right?
It's, stand on your conviction. Somebody asked me, it was in an interview I did last week. It was one of the best questions I think I've been asked in this marathon of interviews that I've done. And one of the questions was, what do you think is the biggest problem in the world right now? And I sat there for a second. I said, to me, it's the lack of courage and the lack of conviction. And, that everybody wants to go along to get along. And it's like the tall poppy syndrome thing in Australia. And it's the lack of courage and the strength of conviction, having the lion heart, going back and watching The Wizard of Oz, stop being the cowardly lion, put God's spirit in your heart, get God, know what your strength of convictions are, and have courage to stand on what you believe, irrespective of the outcome, irrespective of what the fallout is. Because at the end of the day, you're only going to be here so many days on the planet.
Right.
Our days are numbered. Never take a single breath for granted, as Josh Groban would say, right? And he's one of his songs, right?
Right.
Is that one day you're going to stand in front of your maker and have an accountability for your life. For me, and I think for you too, the way I feel is that I want to stand in that space of being able to say, this is what, I carried on no matter how hard it was, no matter what the obstacles were, no matter what you put in front of me, no matter the hardships you put on me, I did what God wanted me to do, the spirit of my conviction, so that someday he will say, well done, good and faithful servant. You stayed the course no matter how hard it was. So I want to inspire that in people to have the courage of whatever your spirit of conviction is, to be the best homeschooling mom you could possibly be on the planet ever, to be the best farmer, to raise the best food. I mean, whatever God has put on your heart to be your conviction to move forward, to do it with courage. Do it with courage, because you're going to need it going forward.
Right. I'll never forget, VAX 2 had a very profound impact on me. And I'll never forget it, whether it was in the documentary itself or Polly talking about it, when she said, "This is so barbaric."
It is.
And
it's sacrificing children for commerce.
Right. This is barbaric. This is, this is uglier than if you just machine gunned them.
It is.
This is really gruesome.
Injecting them under, making it be, you got to do this. It's all like for your health and make you happy. You go to the CDC and you look at those pictures and you just want to puke, and so it's like, but it's all about commerce. We are injecting you with things either to AI, or make you sick, make you a customer for life. We are sacrificing children for commerce. And I always think about parents going in unknowingly and they walk in. Remember those back in the 1970s, those grade B sci-fi movies, that you walk up to, in the Inca land and you put the virgin on the counter and the table to sacrifice them to the gods. That's always the vision I go through my head of parents that go in and put their baby on this table to sacrifice them to the pharma gods. So and they don't even know they're doing it.
I don't think it's interesting. I don't want to start a new conversation. This will be what we talk about next. I don't think that what is happening because the pharmaceutical companies want to make money. I think that's the financial incentives are engineered so that they will push, they're set up so that they will push. But I think we're looking at something that's much, much more strategic in thinking. So you really are talking about Hotel Auschwitz here. And I think they're experimenting and prototyping with how to get heavy metals and other things into people and engineer them in certain ways. They're engineering a workforce. This is livestock management. And they're willing to sacrifice a lot of children and a lot of lives to engineer their prototypes and to try things. So it's very, very dark. And that's why, but the important thing to understand is none of that can go on unless the broad majority of people implement it.
Yep.
In other words, This is us.
I know we're allowing it. That expression, who was it that said, we get the government we deserve? We're non-participant, and it's not just about government. We get kind of like the life, where do we draw the line? Where is our courage? Where's our spirit of conviction? Where is our alignment, the vertical alignment with God? Where do we do this? It's time. It's time for people to get real with that,
Right.
It really is.
It's time. Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, thank you so much. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Talk soon. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.